All right, now that you've got your layers created and we've got the UCS and views created, we can set up the layer states. So we don't have anything much drawn yet for the elevations or the roof plan, but we can still set up the layer states. Basically, you want one with the first floor plan along with the elevations and the roof plan layers, and one for the second floor plan and roof and elevation layers. So the easiest thing to do, as you might expect, would be to run the first floor layer state and then come back and make sure everything in your elevation layers is also on and thawed, and also the roof layers, which they are in this particular case, and my second floor is already turned off, so we're good. And then you just create the layer state. New layer state, I would call it elevations with first floor plan and roof plan. And then you do the same thing for the second floor. So go back to layer properties. Actually, you could actually run the second floor layer state. All right, and then you come back to the layer properties, and you want to make sure that all the first floor layers are frozen and all your second floor layers are thawed along with the elevations and the roof plan layers. So that looks good to me. All right, and so just create the layer state for that. New layer state, elevations with second floor plan and roof plan. Now at some point you may want to separate the roof plan out as a separate layer state in addition to that layer state, but it's good to have it with this to begin with. All right, so the advantage to that is now you can turn the direction in either the first floor or the second floor and be able to orthographically project. All right, at this point we're going to go ahead and explode the block. All right, and then you might want to explode this one too so we can get a hold of it. All right, so in elevation, you're drawing what you actually see in the elevation. So when you project lines down for the edges of the elevation, you're actually seeing the edge of the siding, not the framing. So I would go ahead and set this to A elevation dark, because it's the primarily used bold color for this. So we're on the first floor. On the second floor. We probably ought to start with the first floor. So, all right. So orthographically, as you might expect, you would need ortho on. You can use an XL line, a construction line. And you can just draw a line, or you can use what I call ray. That's actually the name of the command. R-A-Y, not array, but just R-A-Y. It's a one-directional construction line, basically, and you can come off the endpoint here and just drag it in that direction. As long as your ortho is on, it'll just continue in that same direction. It'll give you where the first floor edges are. So you look where your siding is across the drawing, and that's where you want to draw those lines. We'll come back and pick up the columns in a minute. But we're drawing edge lines of the projection edges at this point. So that's what you actually see, the framing's behind it. All right, so we don't need to go to infinity on this. I'm going to trim those lines back. And they're also representing the first floor only. And it may actually go, some of them may go to the second floor, but since we're not sure yet, I'm going to head and trim them back to the first floor plate height. When that block came in, it established the first floor, finished floor, the finished floor plate height, the second floor finished floor, the overhang distance down, the 4 3/4, and the second floor plate height. So that's what those lines are representing. So now I'll go to the second floor layer state along with those other stuff, and I will do the same thing, except You do not need to separate the elevation layers between first and second floors because it's all part of the same thing, and they're not stacked on top of each other, not in the same way the plan is. But you do need to be careful of layers. All right, not rat, Ray. So here's the edge of the second floor. Here's the edge here, which is probably lining up with the first floor there. We'll see. And then that's it. So we'll go down here. So here, the second floor does not completely sit over the first floor. It does here and there, but it doesn't there. So in some cases it does, in some cases it doesn't. So I'm going to trim those back down to the plate height. And for clarity, I'm going to go ahead and trim these back up because it's part of the second floor lines. We'll probably reconnect them later. All right, so we've got the edge lines for the front elevation. You would do the same thing for the other elevations. One of the things we're going to need to add are the openings, the windows and the doors. There are blocks we can use for that, but one of the things that we need to establish is where the header height is. The header height is the bottom of the header, bottom of the framing over the opening, and it's also the top of the window. So the yellow line on the window needs to be at header height when we insert it. The windows themselves are on A elevation glazing, this layer, and we need to determine where that is. So we go back to the first floor. We've got 3 W3 windows there. We've got bold W4 windows there, a door here, and a W3 there. So we need to probably look up on the reference page, the reference sheet that you got in the first class. It's also under reference sheets in Blackboard, the schedules for that. So the W3 is a 4 foot by 2 feet awning window, but we need to locate it. And these were located by midpoint, so we're going to locate it the same way in the elevation. I'm just going to use a ray line from the midpoint here. All right, my midpoint's not on right now, so I'm going to type in O-snap, and I'm going to take off center. I'm going to put on midpoint, intersection. I'm going to take off extension and put on perpendicular. Endpoint, midpoint, intersection, and perpendicular are always the most useful. All right, so do that again. Ray, this should pick up my midpoint now. If that you're not seeing the triangle, hit F3 to turn it on. It's also, where is it? Yeah, it's this one down here. It's your object snap. It's either that or F3. So I'm going to do that there, and I forgot to set my layer, so I'm going to go back to A glazing, A elevation glazing. Erase that to make sure we're on the right layer, and you just follow that across for the windows and likely for the door as well, although the door is likely on a separate layer. This, I don't remember how that's hot pointed, so I'm going to actually put lines at the midpoint and at the point they connect here. I think we'll probably have to do it by midpoint, but I don't remember. Here's the door. All right, those are all first floor windows, except for the one door.
What layer is the door on?
I'll have to look. I have to think about it. I think it's on a separate door layer, if I remember correctly. We'll look here in a minute when we bring it in. All right, so the 402 awning winning, the 7 foot header height. So we probably need to offset the finished floor up 7 feet and maybe change the color so we know where it is. So offset 7 feet. This is the header height for the window from the finished floor. And I don't want to get confused with the plate height for the finished floor. So I'm just going to slightly change the color on that. to red, just to make a little bit of a difference. All right, so 402 awning. So elevation glaze, go to insert, go to my blocks. The one that says awning is the one that you're going to want. It is partially dynamic. It doesn't always have a good hot point, but this has actually got a decent hot point on it, so it's going to go right there. But when we expand it, we may have to move it again. So right now, it's telling us it's 1.6. It's actually 4.0, and this way should be 2.0. So let me double check. 4.0. So the yellow line on the window is in the same place as the 7 foot. So bottom of the header, top of the window. In addition to that, you also got a reference sheet that I handed out, which is also in Blackboard, about what's happening around the windows. Kind of zoom in here a little bit more. So we're going to have a 3.5-inch trim going around the window from the edge of the window, and at the bottom there's an 1.5-inch seal that goes out an inch on both sides. Probably easiest. Now that layer is different than the glazing layer. It's actually the trim layer, which is the elevation light. And so a 3.5-inch trim would be like a 1x4. Alright, so to do that, I'm going to reset the layer. Take A elevation light, and then I'm going to draw around the window entirely with a polyline. We'll come back and explode it in a minute, but this is the easier way, I think. And we have 3.5-inch trim on 3 sides, so we're going to offset that 3.5 inches. But there's no 3.5-inch trim at the bottom. It's only 1.5 inches. So I would stretch the bottom back up. Stretch works by crossing the endpoints. And then at the bottom, I would draw another polyline going from trim to trim, and then I'm going to extend it another 2 inches. I'll show you why in a minute. And then 1.5 inches down for the seal, and then back over to the perpendicular to this line, and then back up, and then enter, and then I'm going to move that over 1 inch. That way it's now centered on the window, and we can get rid of the original polyline that we started with. And if we look at the plan, there's 2 more windows here and there, the same thing. So now that we've drawn all that stuff already, we can just copy it over. Make sure your ortho's on, and you're basically going from a known point to a perpendicular, or a known intersection to a known intersection. All right. The next window we're going to see is this W4. The W4, according to the schedule, is a 6.0 wide window that's 5.4 high. It's double hung, and it also says there's mold together. Mold together means there's no framing between them, so they're just butted against each other. So it's a single hung window this time. So that's a different window. So insert. Before I do that, I need to change my layer to glazing. All right, now go back, insert. So double hung. We'll see where the hot point is here. Still on the midpoint, so that should be there. Now you'll notice I didn't put the yellow line on the red line. you need to move it up. The other thing is this does not come in at the right size. It looks like it's the right size, but it's not. So first thing we're going to do is move this up to make sure the top of the window is on the header. And then we're going to check the size of the window. Right now it came in at 211 and 3/8. I'm not sure why that's even in there, but there you go. All right, we need, okay, so if you can't get it to actually default, you can always just type it in, which makes it a little bit easier. And the other direction, this comes in at 6 feet. It's actually a 5/4 window, not a 6-foot window. And it's also mulled to the window that's next to it, which means there's no framing in between, and it looks like I missed the hot point again, so I'm going to have to go back and move it. So move. The yellow line should be right on top of that red line right there. There we go. The window header height. And then we've got another window right next to it. So we're going to copy. Take it from the known intersection or a known point. Port those on. Alright, so this is a little different because we've got columns in front of the windows. I'm going to go ahead and copy these windows because there's another set of those. Over here. Alright, so let's go back and pick up the columns. The columns are only at the first floor. And they're going to go on A elevation dark. They're out in front of the rest of the house. I guess I'll use Ray instead. I'm going to take these back up here. I'm going to trim these back down to the first floor plate height. Alright, so that's where the edges of the columns are. The columns themselves actually have a trim board at the bottom. So let's go ahead and insert the columns. And we'll have to move them once we get them in. Column porch. Alright, it comes in at the midpoint there, which is not really a good place for this. Plus the fact that the edges of the column here should be aligned with the lines that are on the plans, the main part of the column. So we're going to move here. Basically this is what is needed to align with where we projected from. The columns themselves do not sit at finished floor, they sit on the porch. The top of the porch is 1.5 inches below finished floor. So we're going to move those down 1.5 inches. I'm also going to draw a line that I'm going to move down 1.5 inches here in a second. Let's see, that is the door, so I'm not exactly sure where the edge of the porch is. Right about there. Alright, so it's probably there. So the actual porch height is 1.5 inches below finished floor. Alright, now that I've got that in, I can copy the columns. Basically, maybe from the midpoint to a perpendicular on these. Alright, so that last one I got off. It's easy to do. I didn't hit my perpendicular. You see how it moved up on me? You have to be very careful about how you're moving stuff over. Alright. So these were my projection lines that I can now erase. Alright, so you don't see anything that's behind the columns because the column's obscuring it, but just like these windows over here, you would have had the 3.5 inch trim go around it and then the 1.5 inch seal at the bottom. So I would create it in the same way, then go back and expose the polylines and trim them up. So elevation light, polyline around the yellow line on the window. Offset that 3.5 inches. At the bottom, it's not going to be all the way down like that, so we're going to stretch that back up like we did on the other one. Then we're going to create, you know, technically speaking, you're not going to see that end of that 1.5 inch board underneath it at all. So what might be easier in this case would be to go ahead and explode the polyline. Then you can take out the lines you're not going to see behind the columns and then trim what you're not going to see for the trim up above. And then that line we had left over, we can move it back down 1.5 inches. And then offset it 1.5 inches, or vice versa, either way would have worked. And then trim it out of the column so that you won't see it. Of course, in reality, it would look more like this, except it would be, the trim would be further down, just it's behind the columns, and you would have the same thing occurring over here. So now that we've got all that drawn in and we've got things located, we can kind of just copy what's there. Oop, went to the wrong place. All right. All right, this is the door, the front door. Let's see, which one? Okay, there's not a door layer, so I'm thinking it's probably on the light layer. But let's double check. We'll go to assignments. I'll go to elevations. We'll download that. Yep, The door is on the elevation light layer. Okay. So elevation light it is. Insert. Now the door is not determined by the header. The door, the bottom of the door always goes at finished floor. So door entry. So it's the finished floor that determines where the door is. In this particular case, it happens to be the same height as the windows, but that's not always the case. And you would have trim around this door as well. This might be easier to do a polyline on two sides and then offset it 3.5 inches. And then that would explode it and continue it over to the column. So the column sits in front of the wall. This is the edge line of the siding beyond, which is actually a 1x4 trim there, but you don't see this side of that 1x4. Same thing happens over here. You're actually seeing the column here, and then you're seeing the edge of the siding beyond, but they usually put a corner trim there to cover up the rough edges of the siding. So windows on the first floor, and then over here further back at the garage we've got a W3 window, which is the same as these windows. It's another awning window, so we can just copy one of those. And that's the edge line of the building. All right. You don't need to leave the initial polyline there. All right. So then you would go to the second floor and do the same thing. Put in the windows for there. And you also, both floors have a 7-foot header height. So the first thing I will do is go ahead and offset another 7 feet up from the finished floor, from this line. Finished floor, yeah, all right. Then let's locate the second floor windows, so we'll run that layer state. Probably should put it on the glazing layer before I do that. Three W1s and 2 W2s. The W2 is a, what is that? 3054 double hung. So similar to the first floor, but double hung, only a single double hung at the second floor. All right, so this going to be still the double hung window, which comes in as the wrong size and the wrong location. So let's move that up. 3 feet by 5 feet 4. Let's make sure I've got it in the right place. Okay. Same thing we did before. Go to the elevation light. Draw a polyline around it. Okay. So I missed my intersection, so you can grab the polyline and grip it to the right place. So the question is, that's not where it's supposed to be either. So it should be on top of the yellow line. There we go. So offset that 3.5 inches. And stretch it up at the bottom because it's only 1.5 inches at the bottom. Stretch this one all the way up. And then come in and put a separate polyline just like we did on the first floor. Go all the way across. Add another 2 inches to it. Come down 1.5 inches. Come back over to the perpendicular. Come back up. And then move the thing back this way 1 inch. And then erase your original polyline. Once in, when you've got everything there for the window, you just copy it over because there's another one right next to it. And then we've got fixed glass windows here. They're the what were they? The W1s, I think. Yeah, the W1 windows. 3 feet by 4 feet fixed, so they don't move. Go back to glazing. Insert, it's a different window. The last one fixed. And it's, what did I say? 3.0 wide by 4.0 high. So again, we need to move it to the correct location. And then it's 3.0 wide. And it should be 4.0 high. Add the trim. So at the edges, and in real life, board would overlap the other board, but nobody ever draws it that way. We have a 3.5-inch trim that's always just put at the edge of the elevation, is to cover up the rough edges on the siding. And like I say, in real life, one board would overlap the other one on the trim, because it'd be going in both directions, but we don't really draw it like that in elevations. You just draw the 3.5-inch trim. So anywhere where and remember, it always goes to the inside, not to the outside. So if this is the edge of the siding here, it'd be back to the inside of that is where the trim would go. So if this is the outside here, and it's a 3.5-inch trim, you would just offset it 3.5 inches. On this side, it goes back the other way because that's the edge. You really don't have to do it here because it's behind the columns. So now we can sort of start the roof, but we really need to draw the roof plan before we do too much with that. But we know just from the elevation I gave you that there are 2 gables there in front and it's halfway in between. So I've already set this to where the trim board here, the edge of this trim board is already 2 feet out, not from the siding, which is where this is, but from the frame. So it's 1 foot. Since the siding was 3 inches out, it makes sense for it to be 1.9 from the edge. But it's technically 2 feet out from the framing because the framing will be there before, they do anything as far as the siding goes. Anyway, so it's in the right position, and it's also in the right position in the other direction this way, 4 3/4. So that's in the right position. So it's 2 feet out, or 1.9 feet from the siding. So over here, since we know it's the same ratio, it's the same distance, you could just copy this over like this and take it from intersection to intersection. And that'll end up being the same distance out. But not to the fascia, but to the trim. It's 2 feet from the framing, 1.9 feet from the siding. So then you would just come back and fillet and trim things together, because this is representing the trim, that's representing the fascia. So but this roof is in front of that roof, so you would need to trim out that line and this line. Now the roof would continue on out this direction and that direction. We don't really have exactly where to project that from yet. For our purposes, even though technically fractionally it would be a little bit different in the field, we're going to directly project off the ends of the roof here for the trim and the fascia lines. So in other words, just come directly off the edge there where those intersections are. And that's where our trim and fascia are going to look when the roof turns the other direction. Now these are both gables, and that's actually at the end. There's a lower roof here, but there is a roof over here. To know where that intersects, we need to draw the roof plan. So we'll come back and talk about roofs in a few minutes. But remember not to get tied down with working on one elevation as you're doing this. It's not so important today, but it will be important as you develop the roofs. What I suggested you, when you do the next elevation, you're going to do exactly the same thing we just did. Add the edge lines, the windows, the doors, if there's any columns. All the header heights are at 7 feet. And you can turn it, if you're going to work on the east elevation next, you would project down just between the first and second floors, just like we did. You just work your way around for all 4 elevations and do that. Now, to be able to draw the roof, and in an office, you would actually develop the roof plan and the elevations together to make sure you can get it like you want it to look, because roofs can change how they the building looks quite a bit. But if we draw the roof plan, it'll help us know where to draw in the roof on the elevations. So it's kind of like an office, but we already know what the answer is, so it's not exactly like an office. And if the designer would be playing with different roof pitches and how he wanted the things to work in the office for the sketches. So I'm going to end this video right here.